Hello and welcome to Bite Size History, History of the United Kingdom, brought to you by AI Cast. I'm your host Aidan. In this episode we are going to go over the beginnings of the Bronze Age in Britain. We will take a look at the Beaker people, who introduced new ideas and technologies to the local population, and we will also look at the development of new burial practices and rituals. We will also look at the emergence of new forms of social organization, and we will see how these developments transformed the material and cultural landscape of Britain. The Bronze Age was a period of great technological and cultural development that lasted from around 2500 BCE to 800 BCE. It was characterized by the widespread use of bronze metal for tools and weapons, the emergence of new forms of social organization, and the development of new cultural practices and beliefs. In Britain, the Bronze Age began with the arrival of the Beaker people, who introduced new ideas and technologies to the local population. The Beaker people were a cultural and linguistic group that originated in continental Europe, possibly in the area that is now modern-day Hungary. They were named after the distinctive pottery vessels, which were shaped like inverted bell jars and often decorated with intricate geometric designs. Beaker pots have been found all over Europe, and they are a hallmark of the early Bronze Age. The Beaker people began to migrate westward around 2800 BCE, and they arrived in Britain around 2500 BCE. They brought with them a range of new technologies and cultural practices, including the use of bronze metal for tools and weapons, the practice of burial with grave goods, and the use of specialized flint tools for metalworking. These innovations had a profound impact on the local population, and they laid the foundations for the development of the Bronze Age in Britain. The use of bronze metal for tools and weapons was a significant development in human history. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin, and it is stronger and more durable than either metal alone. The Beaker people had access to both copper and tin deposits, and they were able to produce bronze weapons and tools that were far superior to the stone tools that had been used previously. Bronze weapons such as swords, spears, and axes were used for hunting, warfare, and defense, and they gave their owners a significant advantage over those who still used stone tools. The use of bronze also had significant implications for the economy and society of Bronze Age Britain. The production of bronze required specialized skills and knowledge, and this led to the emergence of specialized craftspeople who produced bronze objects for trade and exchange. Bronze objects were highly valued and were used as a form of currency, and this created new opportunities for economic growth and development. The emergence of new trade networks also led to increased contact and exchange between different communities, and this helped to spread new ideas and technologies throughout the region. The Beaker people also introduced new forms of social organization to Britain. As communities grew larger and more complex, they developed new ways of managing their affairs and regulating their relationships. In some cases, this led to the emergence of chiefdoms, or hierarchical societies led by powerful leaders who controlled resources and exerted authority over their followers. In other cases, communities remained more egalitarian, with decisions made through consensus and cooperation. The development of new burial practices and rituals was another important aspect of the early Bronze Age in Britain. Burial was an important way for communities to honor their dead and maintain their social connections, and the introduction of the Beaker culture brought new ideas and practices to this process. Beaker pots were often buried with the dead, along with other grave goods such as jewelry, weapons, and food. This suggests that the Beaker people believed in an afterlife or spiritual realm, and that they saw death as a significant transition in a person's life. In conclusion, the beginnings of the Bronze Age in Britain were a time of significant change and innovation. The arrival of the Beaker people brought new technologies, cultural practices, and social forms to Britain, and these laid the foundations for later developments in British history. The use of bronze metal for tools and weapons, the emergence of chiefdoms and other forms of social organization, and the development of new burial practices and rituals all played a part in shaping the early Bronze Age. The period was marked by a dynamic process of cultural exchange and adaptation, as the Beaker culture mixed with local traditions to create a unique blend of beliefs, practices, and material culture. The Beaker culture was not the only influence on the early Bronze Age in Britain, however. Other cultural and linguistic groups were also present in the region, and they contributed to the diversity and complexity of the period. For example, the Bell Beaker culture, which was closely related to the Beaker culture but had distinct cultural and material features, was also present in Britain during the early Bronze Age. Other groups, such as the Wessex culture and the Deverell-Rimbury culture, also played important roles in the development of the Bronze Age in Britain. The early Bronze Age in Britain was not a uniform or homogeneous period, but rather a complex and diverse one. Different regions and communities developed in distinct ways, depending on factors such as geography, resources, and cultural influences. For example, in the south and east of Britain, where the Beaker culture was most strongly represented, there was a greater emphasis on burial practices and the use of metal objects. In the north and west, where the Beaker culture was less dominant, there was a greater emphasis on stone tools and weapons. Despite this diversity, however, there were also significant commonalities across the early Bronze Age in Britain. The use of bronze metal for tools and weapons, the development of new burial practices and rituals, and the emergence of new forms of social organization were all features that were shared by many communities. These commonalities helped to create a sense of shared identity and culture, even in the midst of regional variation and diversity. The beginnings of the Bronze Age in Britain were a time of great change and innovation, and they laid the foundations for later developments in British history. The use of bronze metal for tools and weapons, the emergence of chiefdoms and other forms of social organization, and the development of new burial practices and rituals were all key features of this period. These developments transformed the material and cultural landscape of Britain, and they helped to create the conditions for the emergence of new societies, cultures, and civilizations in the centuries that followed. Thank you for listening. If you liked the show, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time on Bite Size History.